Alright guys, my name is MetaGoblin, and today I'm going to be counting down the top 5 improvements that were added in the Wrath of the Lich King expansion. I won't take this video too seriously guys, at the end of the day I'm just having a little bit of fun with this topic. This is just my opinion. I'm not saying this is the word of God or anything like that, because my opinion is probably very different to many people's opinions watching this video, so just something to bear in mind. Nonetheless, I would be interested to hear what you think in the comment section below. Just before I jump in guys, apparently 90% of the people who watch my videos are actually subscribed to the channel, so I would appreciate people who did quickly subscribe and hit that notification bell, because that really does help out. But anyway, let's jump on to the video. So the first point I want to make is better class rotations. It's absolute no lie that most classes during the Burning Crusade and Classic literally only casted one spell. One good example of this would be the Warlock. Warlocks cast Shadow Bolt for 2 years straight and pretty much don't cast anything else unless they have to put a debuff on from time to time. I honestly don't see how people can play Warlock. I honestly say they do not get bored of playing the class, to be honest. Another good example would be the Hunter, who can essentially keybind all their abilities into one macro and just press one macro to do the best achievable DPS in the game. So in my opinion, I see that as a little bit of an issue, to be honest, when it comes to class design. I definitely think there's some improvements in the Burning Crusade, but I think the Wrath of the Lich King definitely made rotations a lot more interesting. The melee classes obviously always had it easier. They normally had multiple abilities in their rotation, but by a large part, all the ranged classes literally would only cast one spell. This definitely means that a class would get boring after a while. I've had people in my guild make jokes about how they keybind Frostbolt to do different keybinds just to keep things a little bit more interesting. So let's look at the average Affliction Warlock rotation in Wrath of the Lich King. First of all, you've got Unstable Affliction, which is an extra dot, and guess what guys, you can actually put your dots on the target. Fancy that. You can use your abilities, all of your DPS abilities, to optimize your DPS, because most of the time during vanilla, only a select few of Warlocks could apply Corruption because there was a debuff limit. You couldn't put all your debuffs on the target. In the Burning Crusade you could, but it was just simply better to spam Shadow Bolt and nothing else. Basically because you had to stack up that Shadow Vulnerability debuff by spamming Shadow Bolt. So yeah, you can use your dots, you use Shadow Bolt as a filler, and you can also use the ability Haunt, which increases the shadow damage that you deal for about 12 seconds. So it increases magnifies your dot damage basically. Which meant there are actually opportunities to combine this with trinkets and procs and stuff like that to snapshot your dots to further optimize the damage of your damage over time. So I definitely conclude that the class rotations were a lot better during Wrath of the Lich King's lifetime. The second point on this list is Dual Spec. Dual Spec allowed you to play essentially two classes at once. You know, if you got bored of playing one spec, you could re-roll another spec without spending an immense amount of gold to respec or re-rolling your character entirely. It made the game much less restrictive, because you could have main spec a certain role, perhaps tank, but then you could casually play a DPS role whenever you got bored of tanking. It just kept the game interesting for longer, and it also removed the restrictions that were in place with, you know, Classic and TBC, because if you wanted to hardcore play PvE, and that's what you want to do, you want to do all the raids and stuff like that, but you also wanted to casually play PvP, you probably wouldn't be able to do that because you have to keep re-rolling, keep re-speccing, which costs loads of money, and then you probably have to spend about 2 hours gold farming, which nobody really wants to do because that's boring. So with Dual Spec, you just had the ability to quickly swap out of your PvE or PvP spec whenever you wanted to do hardcore arena or hardcore raiding. You could also, for instance, have a spec specifically engineered for raiding, but then have a spec engineered for gold farming, so you wouldn't be restricting your ability to farm gold. Anyway, let's move on to my third point, which is very simply Wintergrasp. This is actually one of my favourite aspects of Wrath of the Lich King. This is how, in my opinion, real MMO PvP should be. I don't actually think Arena really belongs in an MMO because it's only 2v2, 3v3, 5v5. That doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. What does make a lot of sense to me is huge, big siege battles. This isn't just any siege battle though, like cross-server or something like that. This is literally the server against itself, the faction rivalry taking place in a single battleground. It was a massive server effort because There was actually an incentive to do Wintergrasp to unlock a raid for about 2.5 hours that could give you tier pieces, emblems and PvP gear. This meant that guilds would form alliances and make tactics on how to deal with attacking or defending Wintergrasp, because guilds obviously wanted to farm that gear as fast as humanly possible. If you were defending, you had to protect an entire fortress from siege vehicles with turrets, or if you're a range caster you could just spam fireball on a ledge and totally destroy enemy siege weapons. If you're attacking, you obviously had to control the siege engines, learn their mechanics, learn all their abilities. There's a mini ranking system that you had to basically kill more and more players to get better rank, to get better siege engines, to do more damage to the gates. You did genuinely have to communicate with everyone else in your raids to actually succeed at Wintergrasp, otherwise you would just be headless chickens. There are so many different ways that people wanted to do the tactics for Wintergrasp. Some people did counter-attacks, some people went hardcore defending, because if you counter-attacked and destroyed towers as a defending player, you would actually make the battleground last short, well, basically made the battleground shorter by cutting the maximum time limit off, which obviously gives the attacking side less time to siege your fortress. It's a real shame that they decided to abandon this concept, because obviously they did add Torbarad, but after that I guess people kind of didn't like it that much. But I think this is what MMOs is all about. It's a lot like the opening of the Gates of Anchorage event. It's all about a server working together in an MMO environment to achieve similar goals, and that concept has largely been lost as World of Warcraft has grown older. For my fourth point, we have heroic raids. The reason why I like heroic raids so much is it makes progression much slower, and it adds a totally new challenge for more skilled players, because obviously the normal raids, after you've done raiding for quite a while, they do get pretty easy, but heroic mode, totally different, because it obviously has way more difficult tactics. I do think that they should have still made the normal raids more difficult than heroic raids as they were in Wrath of the Lich King, about the equal difficulty of Mythic, and that would have been better. But nonetheless, it does keep you busier for longer, and it keeps the game interesting for a longer period of time, because you simply have more gear to farm and more stuff to do. If you look at the subscription count during Wrath of the Lich King, I don't think it's any coincidence that it was at its all-time high as something like 13 million, and I think the large reason for that is because again, there was just so much to do. After you got done with your normal raids, then you'd have to progress into heroic raids, which meant you would have to be subscribed to the game for longer and play the game longer in order to maximise your character. And last point, just a very simple one, I think Wrath of the Lich King had a better emblem system. So the emblem system in Wrath of the Lich King was way more standardised and made a lot more sense. In the Burning Crusade it was all over the place, to be honest. At some states of the game, Badges of Justice didn't drop from bosses in raids, but only dropped from dungeon bosses, and then at some points only particular raids dropped Badges of Justice, so it didn't really make a lot of sense. In Wrath of the Lich King, it's way more simple and easier to understand. Imagine you've done all the raids that you can do for the week, and you still obviously want to play the game, but obviously want to feel like you're progressing your character. What you can do is farm heroic dungeons. You farm heroic dungeons, you get emblems, and then you get gear. Which again, it keeps you busier and it makes you play the game more. And then you would also get emblems from the raids. So if you imagine you do an entire raid without getting any loot, you feel a bit sulky, and you feel like your progression has massively slowed down, and you honestly feel frustrated and bored of the game. But it doesn't matter, because you did actually farm some emblems, so you're still slowly working towards getting some emblem gear instead. And the emblem gear didn't totally replace raid gear. Raid gear was always the best, but emblem gear would fill in some pieces now and again, or it'd be a good improvement until you got the better raid gear. And then sometimes obviously it was best in slot. I just think it was a good system. I think it was actually even better during Cataclysm's time, because it just introduced a system where you could actually work on optimizing your character while you couldn't do any raids, while you were raid locked. So there was actually a reason to log into the game to do something other than actual raiding. At the moment when I play Classic, which I haven't done for probably nearly a month now, the only reason I would actually ever log in to progress my character would be to do raids. As soon as the raids are done, there's no other reason to log in, unless I'm going to PvP, but I can't PvP because I can't respec into an optimal PvP spec. So, overall, Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King just allowed you to actually play the game more, in all honesty, without you getting bored and there's just way less restrictions in place. And that's my final point to end on. My name is MetaGoblin. To my next video, ciao.